Welcome back to Face the Nation. We want to continue our conversation with former FDA Commissioner Dr. Scott Gottlieb. Doctor, the White House is holding this big Independence Day event tonight. They've been talking broadly about declaring independence from the pandemic, or the idea that Americans will be able to feel a little more normal than they did this time last year. Would it be wise to be declaring independence from the pandemic right now?
Well, look, I wouldn't be declaring mission accomplished. I think this is going to be a long fight, but I think we have had a near-term victory against the virus in terms of getting immunity into the population through vaccination. And virus levels are much lower than they were certainly last summer, and they're likely to remain low. I think you're seeing a decoupling between cases and hospitalizations and deaths because there's so much immunity in the population, not just through vaccination, but also through prior infection, people who've acquired immunity from prior infection. But this is likely to become an endemic virus. We're going to have to deal with it. It's likely to be on par with the second circulating flu this winter. At best, it's going to be on par with the second circulating flu. It could be a little bit worse. And I think we're going to need to think differently about respiratory pathogens generally in the wintertime and be more vigilant about the spread of diseases like flu and like coronavirus. Flu was fearsome enough. We were far too complacent about it. And given the fact that we're now going to have the equivalent of a second circulating flu, I don't think we could be complacent about the risk of respiratory pathogens in the workplace and schools anymore. So people are going to need to be more vigilant. We're going to have to do some things differently. That doesn't mean our lives change, but this is going to be a new normal.
Well, and about that, because you've talked a bit about how we have to start thinking differently. Does this mean, for example, we're probably going to have to keep a face mask in our pocket at all times or in our bag, especially come the fall and the winter, and that at times a company or a school or the airlines may say, hey, this week or during these few weeks might be best to mask up or just keep your distance? And is that going to become normal?
I think the use of masks is going to become more normalized. I think people are going to use them on a voluntary basis, and certainly people are at higher risk from COVID, bad COVID outcomes, or from influenza. But I think going to work with the sniffles is going to be frowned upon. I think businesses are going to have access to routine testing. I think there might be symptom checks within certain settings. If you have a congregate setting where a lot of people are getting together, they might check symptoms. Fever guns might become more routine, even though they're not that helpful. I think you're going to see a veneer of safety superimposed upon normal life. That doesn't mean that there's going to be mask mandates reimposed. I'm not sure that's necessarily what we should be doing right now, given the substantially reduced overall death and disease we're seeing from coronavirus, which is likely to continue as long as this virus doesn't mutate in an untoward way. But I do think we're going to need to be more vigilant about the spread of respiratory pathogens. I mean, think back. It was always looked upon as being something that was somewhat brave if you toughed out a cold. That's going to be really frowned upon now. You don't want to be in a social setting where you don't feel well. You're going to be asked to stay home. So things are going to be different. I think we're going to deal differently with the risk of respiratory diseases in the wintertime.
So in other words, if you're that employee who shows up at the office with a cold and says, no, it's fine, I'm going to work through it, really the boss should be telling you, no, go home, rest up, and don't get everybody else sick.
And you might have a symptom check before you even come to work, where they ask you a series of questions. And if you're a child who shows up at school not feeling well, you'll be sent home as well, too. So I think societally, we're just going to have a different etiquette around the risk of respiratory pathogens. We can't afford the morbidity and the mortality from flu and coronavirus being twin viruses that circulate at very high levels. Again, we were too complacent about flu. We let it infect and kill far too many people. I think we're going to have to think differently. That also means improving air quality in workplaces. We're going to be looking at things like airflow and filtration. In the same way we greened buildings, I think we're going to make buildings more healthy as well.
Making his 68th appearance on Face the Nation, you have surpassed Bob Dole and Joe Biden, and you got a ways to go to catch John McCain. But Dr. Scott Gottlieb, we appreciate you being here, and we'll be right back. We head west now to the Republican governor of Utah, Spencer Cox, whose state is one of 4 where the number of Delta variant COVID cases has skyrocketed. Good morning, Governor. Part of why I wanted to chat with you this week is I know you have a unique situation in your state when it comes to infection rates and vaccinations. I want you to talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, we're certainly seeing the Delta variant rise in our state, which is concerning. Hospitalizations are rising again. The good news is that our adult population is getting vaccinated at the same rate as the rest of the country. When you add in the federal partners vaccinations, we're at about 69% right now. But we are the youngest state in the nation. And so we have a very large population of young people who aren't eligible to get vaccinated, those under the age of 12. And in every state, the younger you are, even amongst the eligible population, the less likely you are to be vaccinated. So we're working hard to encourage our younger population to get vaccinated. We have 89% of those over the age of 65. So we feel really good about that. And our death rates have come down because of that. But we desperately need more.
And I know there have been reports of outbreaks among children at overnight camps. Utah has a lot of them. And I know you're eager to get those children vaccinated, as are parents nationwide. How is your state prepared to do that once you get the go-ahead to do it?
Yeah, well, we have set up a very robust vaccination network. Our clinics are spread throughout the state. We're also a very rural state, so that adds a component that's difficult as well. But we have mobile vaccine clinics all over the state. It's never been easier to get a vaccine. We're working with school districts. We did that before, for those over the age of 12, before school was let out, to have vaccine clinics available at schools or close to schools, working with pediatricians and family practitioners as well. So we'll be ready once we get the go-ahead. We're just waiting for the FDA to make that decision.
And I know in several states across the country, they have set up essentially lotteries for people who end up getting a vaccine, and several people have won hefty sums of money for showing up after these lotteries began. But your state legislature, as I understand it, has blocked you from offering cash incentives to people for getting vaccinated. Are you being hamstrung by that? Would you like that option?
Well, we're certainly having those conversations with the legislature. They're looking closely at what's working in other states. I would like all options on the table, but I will say this: I think not dying is a great incentive. My colleague Jim Justice, Governor Justice, this morning said everybody's playing a lottery of sorts. It's if you're not vaccinated, you're playing a different kind of lottery. I think he called it the death lottery, something like that. But certainly we're hopeful that reason will rule. And people will see how effective these vaccines are. Again, 95% of deaths since May have been amongst unvaccinated people in the state. So those are deaths that don't have to happen, hospitalizations that don't have to happen. It's very simple and very easy to get the vaccine now.
We brought this up earlier with Jeff Zients, the White House COVID-19 coordinator, but there's a new Washington Post poll out this morning that reinforces the unfortunate partisan divide on vaccinations. Overwhelming majority of Democrats say they've been vaccinated. Just 45% of Republicans and 38% of Republicans say they'll definitely not get the vaccine. What do you make of that?
Well, it's troubling, and I've spoke about this often over the past, I mean, not even the past 4 years, but the past 8 years, about how unfortunate it is that politics is becoming religion in our country, that politics is becoming sport and entertainment in our country, that everything is political. It's a huge mistake, and it's caused us to make bad decisions during this pandemic and in other phases of our life as well. So it's deeply troubling. We're doing a little better amongst Republicans here in the state of Utah when it comes to vaccines versus those numbers that you just shared, and we'll continue to work with everyone in our state to get them vaccinated. I
want to turn your attention, Governor, to the weather. There have been some incredible maps that have shown drought conditions in your state. You look at this map, for example, a year ago versus now. 100% of Utah is in drought. 98% of the state is in what can be classified as extreme drought. 65% in exceptional drought, the highest intensity. What is the best way to respond to something that's going to be really difficult to reverse at this point?
Sure. Well, there are lots of different responses that are necessary. One, we have to conserve water better. We have to use less water. And that's going to happen in lots of different ways. We have water restrictions across the state. I'm also a farmer. We're down about 70% of our water consumption right now, and that will have economic and food stability impacts across our state. So every person in our state has to use less water. We'll do that through restrictions and technology advances as we move forward. That's number one. Number two, and we talked about this with Western governors just this past week, we have to store more water. The people that settled these arid mountain valleys and Western states knew that. We're not doing a great job of that anymore. I'm grateful that in this bipartisan infrastructure push, there is money for that type of infrastructure. Storing water above ground and underground as well will make a big difference, as we are also the fastest growing state in the nation. So we have to be prepared for generations to come. I know this is personal for you. As you mentioned, you're a sixth generation, I believe, alfalfa farmer.
And so you
That's
see the
correct.
effects of this. Your family has seen the effects of this. But you are a member of a party that includes many who don't still believe in climate change. How detrimental is that to the future of the GOP?
Well, we're working very hard to help people understand the impacts of climate change. You may have noted recently, Representative John Curtis here from the state of Utah helped to form a Republican climate caucus at the federal level. So there's more work being done there. But that's a long term. I mean, that's, as you mentioned earlier, that's a 50-year solution.
Right.
And so we have to do better there. And Utah is doing better. We're cutting back on emissions here in the state of Utah, working with our governors across the West to implement Kate Brown, who you're going to have on. We're working on electric car infrastructure across the West. So great things are happening there, but we also have to take the short-term impacts and take them very seriously, which President Biden did this week, talking about wildfires in the West.
Yes, Governor Spencer Cox joining us from his home in Fairview, Utah. We appreciate it. Please come back, and when you're here in D.C. especially, please come see us. We want to move next to Oregon, which is starting to subside from record heat, but each day we're learning more deaths are being linked to it. In Oregon alone, at least 95 people have died. Democratic Governor Kate Brown joins us from Portland with the latest this morning. And Governor, climate scientists have long said events like this hot streak you just had are likely to be more frequent, more intense, and last longer in the future. If that's the case, how should residents in your state and across the Pacific Northwest be preparing for that? For example, if there's somebody that doesn't have an air conditioner, should they be going out and getting one right now?
Thank you, Ed, for having me this morning. Delighted to have an opportunity to appear on the program. We have been working to prepare for climate change in this state for a number of years. What was unprecedented, of course, was the 3 days of record-breaking heat, and it was horrific to see over 90 Oregonians lose their lives, and we have to continue with our preparedness work. That includes working with our health partners that provide health care to vulnerable Oregonians to make sure that they understand that there are resources available, for example, to buy an air conditioner if they have certain underlying health conditions. We worked really hard with our community partners, our county emergency management departments, to get the message out that the heat was going to be very, very strong over last weekend. They set up cooling centers, provided water to vulnerable Oregonians. Unfortunately, we still lost too many lives. And absolutely unacceptable. Following events like this, we always do reviews and see what we can do better next time.
And have you begun that review? Have you got any sense of what has to be done?
Absolutely, we have. There's no question. I think the concern, Ed, is that this is a harbinger of things to come. We literally have had 4 emergency declarations in this state at the federal level since April of 2020. In Labor Day last year, we had horrific wildfires. They were historic. We lost over 1 million acres, over 4,000 homes, and 9 lives. And what is really, really clear, that just like we saw during the pandemic, throughout these emergency events, our communities of color, our low-income families are disproportionately impacted, and we have to center the voices of Black and Brown and Indigenous people at the forefront of our work as we do emergency preparedness.
I know this past week you met with the president virtually, along with other Western governors, including Governor Cox, who we just spoke with, to discuss the drought and heat waves and these changing climate patterns. What does Washington, what does the federal government need to be doing to help these Western states prepare for this new normal?
That's a really good question, and it was a question the president asked. In short, we need resources and we need boots on the ground. For example, we need financial resources to be able to purchase critical essential equipment like aircraft to help us fight fire. We need to make sure that we have adequate boots on the ground. Senator Wyden's done a good job fighting for the state of Oregon to get us financial resources to be able to train our National Guardsmen and women ahead of time so they can support our firefighting efforts. But it also means that agencies like FEMA, who do not aid our undocumented families, we need to make sure that that happens. So for example, of the families that lost homes in Southern Oregon last Labor Day fire, several hundred of them were undocumented. FEMA does not provide aid or assistance to these families. It is absolutely unacceptable. These families are so much a part of our communities. They're the heart and soul of our culture, and they are the backbone of our economy. They deserve the assistance, and they need it.
I want to move you to one other issue that is of urgent importance there in Portland, where you are, and in many other cities across the country, and that is the surge in gun violence, especially at a time when police agencies across the country are struggling to retain or hire new officers. You're seeing that issue in Portland. How should police agencies across your state, across the country, deal with this surge in violence at a time when their ranks are depleted?
Well, there's no question that the city of Portland, like many cities across the country, are hurting right now. The level of gun violence is absolutely unacceptable. We are continuing to move forward on legislation at the state level. Every Oregonian has the right to be free from gun violence. In terms of our law enforcement community, we have had in this state, and I think across the country, a long overdue clarion call for racial justice. And what is really, really true is that our law enforcement system needs a culture change. And that's the area that I am working on with my team and with new leadership at the agency that trains and oversees the Oregon State Police and law enforcement across the entire state.
Let's have you back to talk about that again sometime soon. We appreciate the time today. Happy Independence Day to you, Governor Brown of Oregon, and we'll be back in a moment. In a recently declassified report, U.S. intelligence officials have offered no explanation for dozens of unexplained sightings witnessed by Navy pilots since 2004. Congressman Carson of Indiana chaired a classified briefing on this report and joins us from Washington. Congressman, happy Independence Day to you. I know you can't share all the details of that classified report. We wish you could. And before we talk about UFOs, I want to ask you about these reports of a new ransomware attack over the weekend that apparently has affected at least dozens of American companies. As a member of the Intelligence Committee, have you learned anything more about it?
Well, these attacks obviously have always targeted primarily two pillars of our American foundation, the government and U.S. businesses. And we've seen this debacle with SolarWinds. We've seen it with the Colonial Pipeline. We've been briefed as a committee. We're looking into it. The Biden administration has a very serious plan in terms of pushing back on these attackers. And so along with the startup entities and small businesses and the U.S. government, we're working on encryption. You know, we want a system that is protected, but we don't want something that's so impenetrable we can't catch criminals and human sex traffickers. And so we're working through this issue regularly.
Just for the sake of time to cut to the chase, do we know who did it? Was it Russia?
I can't speak to that matter right now.
Okay, not taking it off the table. Understood. Look, this report that the Pentagon released and that you're pushing for more conversation about, it's about a 9-page declassified report, and nowhere in this do I see mention of the words outer space, extraterrestrial, or alien. Seems they didn't want to go there. Is that wrong? Should that be ruled out?
Well, the report is inconclusive. What we do know is that there are nearly 100, and there have been nearly 150 sightings. 80 of those sightings have been detected with some of the best technology the world has ever seen. And we can't rule out something that's otherworldly, but that's a very small percentage. People want members of the government to say it's extraterrestrial. We won't stop there, but certainly it poses a technological concern for us, and it poses a national security concern for us, because we don't want our adversaries to have, one, a technological advance over us in terms of what they can do and their capabilities. But what is curious is that many of these sightings have occurred around many of our military assets, our naval bases, our military installations.
Yeah, I mean, you said earlier this week in another interview that it's your hope that these so-called UAPs aren't something from another nation who has a strategic and technological advantage, and that it's not from the private sector. I mean, if it's not them, then what is it?
Well, I mean, you know, we always have to look at natural phenomenon. We have to look at the weather balloons. We have to look at drones. We have to look at aircraft that we may not be able to understand. At least most people may not be able to understand. But if it is otherworldly, we have to take into account our advancements in terms of our cell phone technology and why aren't these images being captured. We have to think about the nearly 4,000 satellites that are orbiting the Earth right now. Most of those satellites have cameras attached to them. Why hasn't any of that information been released? And so we still want to make sure that our adversaries don't have a technological edge on us, but we still can't rule out that 2 to 6% that could be something we can't explain, maybe even otherworldly. So my hope is, as the chairman of the subcommittee on counterintelligence and counterproliferation, that we will have a series of hearings and possibly a public hearing in the very near future.
When would that be?
You know, we have a pretty ambitious schedule. Chairman Schiff has a pretty ambitious agenda, and at my own committee, we're planning on having a series of hearings, hopefully in Indiana as well, dealing with our white nationalist threat, our internal threats to our internal security, and hopefully we will discuss UAPs in the very near future. I can't give a definitive date right now.
You've talked about sort of dealing with the stigma of the possibility that this is coming from somewhere beyond Earth. In your view, quickly, is there life out there?
Look, it would be arrogant to say that there isn't life out there. Certainly, I believe that there's something in the expanse of the universe. Now, the question is there life in our solar system? Perhaps the moons of some of our planets will give us clues. Maybe there's microbial life. Maybe there's life in some of the oceans on the moons. We'll find out very soon, hopefully.
We appreciate this out of this world conversation, Congressman. Thank you for spending part of the holiday with us. And we'll be right back. For Face the Nation, I'm Ed O'Keefe, in for John Dickerson, who's in for Margaret Brennan. We appreciate you being here. Enjoy your 4th of July. Have a great Sunday.